The blue and red lights cut through the darkness like knives, painting the quiet suburban street in alternating waves of color. Marcus Thompson sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. His heart hammered against his ribcage as two police officers approached from either side, their flashlights blazing through his windows like interrogation lamps. "License and registration," the first officer barked, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. Marcus reached slowly toward his glove compartment, making sure every movement was deliberate and visible. He had been through this before. He knew the rules of survival. "I'm reaching for my documents now," Marcus said clearly, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. "They're in the glove compartment." The officer on the driver's side watched him with hawk-like intensity, one hand resting on his holster. Marcus retrieved the papers and handed them over, his mind racing through every possible scenario that could unfold in the next few minutes. The officer examined the documents under his flashlight, then looked up at Marcus with narrowed eyes. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." It wasn't a request. Marcus complied, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. The cool night air hit his face as he stood beside his Mercedes, the same car he had worked 15 years to afford. The same car that apparently made him suspicious in this neighborhood. "What seems to be the problem, officers?" Marcus asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in despite his vulnerable position. He knew he had every right to ask, every right to understand why he was being stopped just 3 blocks from his own home. The second officer, younger with a crew cut and a smirk that seemed permanently etched on his face, circled around the car. "Nice ride for this neighborhood. Where'd you get it?" "Your dealer." The words landed like punches, each one calculated to demean and provoke. The first officer chuckled, a sound that made Marcus's stomach turn. "I'm an attorney," Marcus replied, keeping his voice level. "I live 2 streets over. I'm just heading home from work." He watched their faces carefully, seeing the moment of surprise flicker across their features before being replaced by something uglier, disbelief mixed with resentment. "Sure you are," the first officer said, his laugh growing louder. "And I'm the mayor. Turn around and put your hands on the car." Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not after everything he had accomplished. On what grounds? Marcus demanded, his legal training overriding his instinct to comply. "You have no probable cause to search me or my vehicle. I haven't broken any laws." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they wouldn't matter. He could see it in their eyes, the decision had already been made. The younger officer moved closer, invading Marcus's space with practiced aggression. "We got a report of suspicious activity in the area. A black Mercedes, just like yours. Now, you can cooperate, or we can make this difficult. Your choice, counselor." The last word dripped with mockery, as if the very idea of Marcus being a lawyer was some kind of elaborate joke. Marcus's mind raced through his options. He could resist and risk escalation. He could comply and sacrifice his dignity. There was no winning scenario here, only degrees of losing. He thought of his wife, Sarah, waiting at home. He thought of his daughter, Maya, asleep in her bed. He thought of every case he had ever argued about unlawful stops and racial profiling. "I want to see your supervisor," Marcus said firmly. "And I'm recording this interaction." He gestured to his phone mounted on the dashboard, its camera light blinking red. The officers exchanged glances, their amusement fading into irritation. What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion and shouting. Hands grabbed his arms, wrenching them behind his back. Cold metal bit into his wrists as handcuffs clicked into place. Marcus heard his own voice protesting, citing laws and rights that seemed meaningless in this moment. The officer's laughter rang in his ears, harsh and dehumanizing. "Look at him, thinks he's somebody special," one of them said, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Bet he stole that suit too." More laughter. More humiliation. Marcus felt himself being pushed toward the patrol car, his expensive Italian shoes scraping against the rough pavement. As they shoved him into the back seat, Marcus caught his reflection in the car window. He saw a man in a tailored suit, a man with a doctorate in law, a man who had argued cases before appellate courts. But in the eyes of these officers, he saw what they saw, just another black man who didn't belong. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead like angry insects, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made Marcus feel nauseous. He sat on a hard metal bench in the holding area, still handcuffed, watching officers come and go with the casual indifference of people going about their daily routine. To them, this was just another night. To him, it was a nightmare that kept spiraling deeper. "Thompson." A desk sergeant called out his name like he was calling for a number at a deli counter. Marcus stood, his muscles stiff from maintaining dignity while sitting in restraints. A female officer approached, older than the two who had arrested him, her expression neutral and professional. She unlocked his handcuffs, and Marcus felt the blood rush back into his hands with painful intensity. "Personal effects here," she said, sliding a plastic bin across the counter. Marcus watched as his belongings were catalogued. Wallet, keys, watch, phone, wedding ring. Each item represented a piece of his identity being stripped away and reduced to inventory. His phone, which had captured the entire traffic stop, was now in their possession. He wondered if the footage would mysteriously disappear or if it would become the evidence that vindicated him. "I need to make a phone call," Marcus said, his throat dry. The sergeant nodded and gestured to a phone mounted on the wall. Marcus dialed Sarah's number from memory, each ring feeling like an eternity. When she answered, her voice heavy with sleep, he had to fight to keep his own voice steady. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. I've been arrested." He heard her sharp intake of breath, then silence as she processed his words. "I need you to call Tom Henderson. Tell him I'm at the 5th precinct. Tell him everything was recorded. Tell him I need him now." Tom Henderson was Marcus's old law school friend, now one of the best criminal defense attorneys in the state. More importantly, he was someone who would understand the gravity of what was happening. Sarah's voice came back stronger, the lawyer's wife taking over from the frightened spouse. "I'm on it. Don't say anything to anyone. I love you." "I love you too," Marcus replied before the line went dead. He hung up the phone and turned back to face the sergeant, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Pity, maybe. Or recognition that something about this arrest didn't sit right. The hours that followed moved with excruciating slowness. Marcus was processed, photographed, and fingerprinted like a common criminal. Each procedure felt designed to strip away another layer of his humanity. He saw other men in the holding cells, some sleeping, some pacing, all wearing the same expression of resignation. How many of them were innocent? How many had been stopped for the crime of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time? Around 3 in the morning, Tom Henderson arrived like a force of nature. Marcus heard his voice before he saw him, that distinctive baritone cutting through the bureaucratic mumble of the night shift. "Where is Marcus Thompson? I'm his attorney, and I want to see him now." When Tom finally appeared, his suit slightly rumpled from being pulled out of bed, Marcus felt something inside him unclench. Tom's face was a mask of professional anger, the kind that promised consequences for everyone involved in this travesty. They were given a small room for consultation, barely larger than a closet, but it felt like sanctuary. "Tell me everything," Tom said, pulling out a legal pad. Marcus recounted the entire encounter, every detail he could remember. Tom's expression grew darker with each revelation, his pen moving rapidly across the paper. When Marcus finished, Tom sat back and let out a long breath. "This is bad, Marcus. Really bad. But we're going to make this right." Tom's confidence was reassuring, but Marcus could see the concern beneath it. They both knew that being right wasn't always enough in situations like these. The system had a way of protecting its own. "The charges are resisting arrest and obstruction of justice," Tom continued, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Both complete garbage, but they're moving forward with it. Your arraignment is scheduled for 9 this morning." Marcus glanced at the clock on the wall. 6 hours away. 6 hours that would feel like 6 years. Tom leaned forward, his eyes locking with Marcus's. "Here's what's going to happen. We go into that courtroom, we plead not guilty, and we start building the case that's going to end these officers' careers. Your recording is going to be key, assuming they haven't tampered with it." Marcus nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the courtroom, about the judge who would preside over his arraignment. About the prosecutor who would argue that he deserved to be there. About the system he had devoted his life to serving, the same system that was now crushing him beneath its weight. "There's something else," Marcus said slowly, a realization dawning on him. Tom looked up, eyebrows raised. "My docket. I have cases scheduled today. I'm supposed to be in court." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Marcus Thompson, attorney at law, would indeed be in court today, but as a defendant rather than an advocate. Tom's expression shifted, understanding flooding his features. "What courtroom?" "Division 6. Judge Patricia Morrison presiding." Marcus watched as Tom processed this information, saw the wheels turning in his friend's mind. Judge Morrison was known for her no-nonsense approach and her particular intolerance for police misconduct. But she was also scheduled to hear 3 of Marcus's cases that morning. Dawn crept through the small window of the holding cell like an unwelcome visitor, painting streaks of gray light across the concrete floor. Marcus hadn't slept. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those officers' faces, heard their laughter echoing in his mind. He stood and stretched, his body aching from the uncomfortable bench that served as furniture in this cage. Other men in nearby cells were beginning to stir, some looking at him with curiosity. A man in his 50s with gray hair and kind eyes nodded at him from across the corridor. "First time?" he asked quietly. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. "You'll get through it. We all do." The words were meant to comfort, but they had the opposite effect. Marcus didn't want to be part of this club, this brotherhood of the arrested and processed. He was supposed to be on the other side of these bars, fighting for justice, not experiencing the sharp end of injustice himself. At 7:30, a guard came to escort him to the transport that would take him to the courthouse. Marcus was handcuffed again, this time with other defendants, all of them chained together like some grotesque human train. They shuffled into the van, and Marcus found himself squeezed between a young man who smelled of alcohol and an older man who kept muttering to himself. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Marcus stared out the window at the city he thought he knew. People walked to work with coffee cups in hand, utterly oblivious to the van of shackled humanity passing by. Life went on for them, normal and predictable, while his own life had been turned inside out in a single night. The courthouse holding area was even worse than the police station. Overcrowded, overheated, and filled with the smell of too many bodies in too small a space. Marcus was processed again, checked in by a bailiff who barely looked at him. He was given a number and told to wait for his name to be called. Tom appeared at the bars of the holding area, his face grave. "They're setting your case for the end of the morning docket," he said in a low voice. "Judge Morrison has to clear her other cases first. Including, ironically, 3 of yours." Marcus felt his heart sink. His clients. People who had hired him to represent them, who trusted him to advocate for their rights. What would they think seeing him here? What would happen to their cases? "I've arranged for associates from my firm to cover your cases," Tom continued, reading Marcus's expression. "They're good lawyers, Marcus. Your clients will be taken care of." But Marcus could hear the unspoken concern in his friend's voice. Reputation was everything in their profession, and damage was being done with every minute that passed. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Marcus heard cases being called, heard the shuffle of feet as defendants were led to and from the courtroom. He recognized some of the voices drifting back, prosecutors he had worked with, bailiffs he had joked with, the ambient sounds of a system he had been part of for over a decade. Around 11 o'clock, Marcus heard a familiar voice in the holding area. "Thompson? Marcus Thompson?" It was Randy Chen, a fellow defense attorney who had referred cases to Marcus in the past. Randy's face appeared at the bars, shock and confusion written across his features. "Marcus? What the hell are you doing in there?" Randy's voice carried genuine bewilderment. Marcus saw other attorneys gathering, drawn by the commotion. He saw their faces cycle through disbelief, recognition, and then something more complex, a mixture of sympathy and fear. If it could happen to Marcus Thompson, it could happen to any of them. "Wrong place, wrong time, wrong skin color," Marcus said, his voice carrying more bitterness than he intended. Randy's expression hardened with understanding and anger. Within minutes, Marcus could hear the buzz of conversation spreading through the courthouse. Attorneys talking to other attorneys. The legal community was small, and news traveled fast. Tom reappeared, and this time his expression had changed. There was a gleam in his eye that Marcus recognized, the look of a lawyer who had just found a crucial piece of evidence. "The recording from your phone," Tom said quietly. "I got a court order to preserve it. Marcus, it's all there. Every word, every laugh, every illegal moment of that stop. They have nothing. Absolutely nothing." Marcus felt a surge of hope, followed immediately by caution. Evidence was one thing. Justice was another. He had seen too many cases where clear evidence of wrongdoing somehow didn't translate into accountability. But at least they had a fighting chance. "There's more," Tom continued, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. "I did some digging on the officers who arrested you. Officer Reeves has 3 complaints of racial profiling in his file. Officer Martinez has 2. All of them dismissed by internal affairs, but the pattern is there. We're not just fighting your case, Marcus. We're potentially opening up a systemic issue." Before Marcus could respond, a bailiff called out, "Thompson. Marcus Thompson." You're up. This was it. The moment when he would walk into a courtroom not as an attorney, but as a defendant. Marcus stood, his legs suddenly feeling weak. Tom gripped his shoulder firmly. "Remember who you are," Tom said quietly. "Remember everything you fought for. This is just another battle, and we're going to win it." Marcus nodded, drawing strength from his friend's confidence. The bailiff unlocked the holding cell and gestured for Marcus to follow. As they walked down the corridor toward the courtroom, Marcus could hear the buzz of activity inside. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. Whatever was about to happen, he would face it with dignity. He would not let them break him. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open, and Marcus stepped through them in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit that felt like a costume from some horrible play. The bailiff guided him to the defense table where Tom stood waiting. But something was wrong. Marcus could feel it in the air, a strange tension, an unusual silence that fell over the room as he entered. The gallery was packed. Unusually packed for an arraignment. Marcus scanned the crowd and saw faces he recognized, fellow attorneys, clients, members of the legal community. His wife Sarah sat in the front row, her face a mask of controlled emotion. Beside her was his daughter Maya, who should have been in school but was instead watching her father be paraded like a criminal. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison," the bailiff announced. The courtroom shuffled to its feet, and Marcus heard the familiar sound of judicial robes swishing as Judge Morrison entered from her chambers. She was a striking woman in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Marcus had appeared before her dozens of times, always with respect for her fairness and her fierce intelligence. Judge Morrison settled into her seat, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom before landing on Marcus at the defense table. For a brief moment, her professional mask slipped, revealing something that looked like shock and anger. She recovered quickly, her expression returning to judicial neutrality, but Marcus had seen it. She knew exactly who he was. "Case number 2024 CR 18756, the clerk announced. State versus Marcus James Thompson. Charges of resisting arrest and obstruction of justice." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus felt Tom tense beside him as they both waited for the proceedings to begin. The prosecutor, a young woman named Jennifer Walsh whom Marcus had worked with on several cases, stood to present the state's position. But Marcus noticed something odd. She seemed uncomfortable, her usual confidence absent. "Your Honor, the state requests that Mr. Thompson be held on $10,000 bail pending trial." Judge Morrison's eyebrow arched. $10,000? For a first-time offender with significant community ties and a professional career? That seems excessive, Ms. Walsh. What's the basis for this request? The prosecutor fumbled with her papers. "The defendant was uncooperative during his arrest, Your Honor. The officers indicated he was aggressive and—" "I'm going to stop you right there," Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice carrying an edge that made everyone in the courtroom sit up straighter. "Before we proceed further, I need to address something unusual about this case." She turned her attention fully to Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, do you recognize this courtroom?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor. I've appeared before you many times." "That's right. You have. In fact, you were scheduled to appear before me this very morning on 3 separate cases, representing 3 different clients. Isn't that correct?" Judge Morrison's eyes bored into him, but Marcus understood what she was doing. She was establishing his credibility in front of everyone present. "Yes, Your Honor. That's correct." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he understood the game being played. Judge Morrison was one of the good ones, and she was about to demonstrate why. "Ms. Walsh," Judge Morrison continued, turning back to the prosecutor, "are you aware that the defendant in this case is Marcus Thompson, a member of the bar in good standing, with over 12 years of experience practicing law in this jurisdiction? A man who has never had so much as a parking ticket." The prosecutor looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. "I was not fully briefed on the defendant's background, Your Honor." "Clearly," Judge Morrison said dryly. "And are you aware of the circumstances of his arrest?" She picked up a document from her bench, and Marcus recognized it as the police report. According to this report, Mr. Thompson was stopped 3 blocks from his own residence for suspicious activity that is never clearly defined. When he asked for the legal basis of the stop, he was arrested. Does that summary seem accurate to you, Ms. Walsh? The courtroom was silent except for the prosecutor's uncomfortable shifting. "That's what the report indicates, Your Honor, but nothing," Judge Morrison cut her off again. "I've read this report 3 times, and I cannot find a single articulable fact that would justify this stop, let alone this arrest. What I do find is a disturbing pattern of assumptions and actions that raise serious constitutional questions. Tom stood up, sensing his moment. Your Honor, the defense would like to submit evidence that was captured during the traffic stop in question. He held up a USB drive. This is video and audio footage from Mr. Thompson's dashboard camera, which recorded the entire encounter. We believe it will clearly demonstrate that this arrest was without probable cause and was, in fact, motivated by racial bias. Judge Morrison nodded sharply. I'll review that footage in chambers immediately after this hearing. But based on what I've read so far, I'm inclined to release Mr. Thompson on his own recognizance. Does the state have any objection? The prosecutor looked back toward the gallery where Marcus noticed for the first time several police officers sitting, including the two who had arrested him. Their faces had changed from smug satisfaction to growing concern. Ms. Walsh seemed to be receiving some kind of signal from them, and Marcus watched the internal conflict play out on her face. The state maintains its request for bail, Your Honor, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. Judge Morrison's expression hardened. Request denied. Mr. Thompson, you are hereby released on your own recognizance. I'm setting a preliminary hearing for 1 week from today, at which time I expect the state to present a compelling justification for these charges, or I will dismiss them with prejudice. She banged her gavel once, sharply. But she wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate internal investigation into the conduct of the arresting officers. Bailiff, please note for the record that Officers James Reeves and Carlos Martinez are to be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of that investigation. The gavel came down again, and this time the sound seemed to echo with finality. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Marcus felt Tom's hand on his shoulder, heard his friends whispered, "We did it." But Marcus's attention was fixed on Judge Morrison, who was looking directly at him with an expression that conveyed both sympathy and determination. Mr. Thompson, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, approach the bench, please. Marcus moved forward on shaky legs, Tom beside him. Judge Morrison leaned forward, speaking quietly enough that only they could hear. I am deeply sorry for what you've experienced. No member of this bar, no citizen of this community, should be subjected to what happened to you. I want you to know that this court will ensure a full and fair investigation. Her eyes were fierce with conviction. The bailiff removed Marcus's handcuffs, and the simple act of freedom felt profound. His wrists bore red marks from the metal, visible evidence of his night in custody. He rubbed them absently as he walked back to the defense table, trying to process everything that had just happened. The courtroom was still buzzing with conversation, attorneys and observers trying to make sense of the dramatic turn of events they had just witnessed. Sarah rushed forward the moment court was adjourned, wrapping her arms around Marcus so tightly he could barely breathe. She was crying, her body shaking with the release of tension and fear that had built up over the long night. Maya joined them, and for a moment, Marcus allowed himself to simply exist in that embrace, drawing strength from the two people who meant everything to him. Dad, you were so brave, Maya whispered against his shoulder. She was 14, old enough to understand the implications of what had happened, old enough to be frightened by the reality that her father could be taken from her for no reason at all. Marcus held her tighter, wishing he could shield her from this harsh truth about the world they lived in. Tom was gathering papers, already planning their next moves. But Marcus noticed something happening in the courtroom around them. Attorneys were lining up, waiting to speak with him. Randy Chen was first, his expression serious. Marcus, whatever you need, whatever resources, you've got them. The defense bar is with you on this. Others echoed the sentiment. Marcus found himself shaking hands, accepting embraces, listening to expressions of outrage and support. These were his colleagues, his professional community, and they were rallying around him. It was touching and overwhelming, but it also highlighted something troubling. He had resources, connections, and standing that most people in his position didn't have. What about them? As the crowd began to thin, Marcus noticed the two officers who had arrested him leaving through a side door, their faces dark with anger and humiliation. They glared at him as they passed, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this wasn't over. Judge Morrison's ruling had been a victory, but it was also a declaration of war. Those officers and their supporters wouldn't take this lying down. We need to talk strategy, Tom said, guiding Marcus toward a private conference room off the main corridor. Sarah and Maya followed, and soon they were all seated around a small table, the door closed against the chaos outside. Tom laid out the situation with characteristic bluntness. We won the battle today, but the war is just beginning. Those charges are going to be dropped. There's no way they can proceed with them given the lack of evidence and the recording. But that's not enough, Marcus. You know it isn't. Marcus nodded slowly. He did know. Dropping the charges would clear his name, but it wouldn't address the systemic problem. It wouldn't prevent this from happening to someone else. It wouldn't hold those officers accountable for their actions. I want to file a civil rights lawsuit, Marcus said quietly. Against the officers, against the department, against the city if necessary. I want to expose every policy, every practice, every bit of training that led to what happened to me. And I want to make sure changes are implemented that will protect others. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. That's going to be a long fight, Marcus. It's going to get ugly. They'll come after you, try to dig up anything they can use against you. Are you sure you're ready for that? Marcus looked at his wife, then at his daughter, then at his friend. He thought about the night he had just endured, about the humiliation and fear. But he also thought about all the people who experienced the same thing without his resources, without his education, without his ability to fight back. He thought about the man in the holding cell who had said, "We all do," as if being processed like criminals was just an accepted part of life. "I'm sure," Marcus said firmly. "I didn't choose this fight, but now that I'm in it, I'm going to see it through. Not just for me, but for everyone who can't fight back." He turned to Tom. "I want you to file the lawsuit as soon as possible. I want to request all body camera footage, all internal affairs reports on those officers, all training materials related to traffic stops and racial profiling." Tom's smile was predatory. "Already working on it. I've got 3 associates pulling together the documentation as we speak. We're going to bury them in discovery requests." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "But Marcus, there's something else you should consider. The media is going to be all over this. Your story is already spreading. By tomorrow, this is going to be national news. You need to decide how public you want to be about this." The thought of national attention made Marcus's stomach turn. He had never sought the spotlight, never wanted to be the face of anything. He was a lawyer, comfortable in courtrooms and conference rooms, not in front of cameras. But he understood the power of narrative, the importance of controlling the story before others could twist it. "I'll do whatever interviews are necessary," Marcus said. "But I want to be clear about what this is really about. This isn't just about me. This is about a system that allows officers to target people based on their skin color. This is about accountability and change." Over the next hour, they planned their strategy. Tom would handle the legal assault, the civil rights lawsuit, the discovery process, the depositions. Marcus would work on the public relations side, carefully crafting the message they wanted to send. Sarah, who worked in nonprofit management, suggested reaching out to civil rights organizations that could provide additional resources and support. As they talked, Marcus felt himself transforming. The fear and humiliation of the previous night were hardening into determination. He had spent his career fighting for justice in individual cases, but now he had the opportunity to fight for something bigger. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When they finally emerged from the conference room, Marcus was surprised to find the courthouse corridor still crowded. News crews had set up outside, and through the windows, he could see reporters and cameras waiting. Randy Chen had organized a group of attorneys to escort Marcus out, forming a protective barrier. "Ready?" Tom asked, straightening Marcus's tie. Someone had brought him fresh clothes, and he had changed out of the orange jumpsuit in the courthouse bathroom, reclaiming another piece of his identity. Marcus took a deep breath and nodded. They walked toward the exit, the group of attorneys surrounding him like a shield. As they pushed through the doors, the afternoon sunlight hit Marcus's face, warm and bright. The cameras turned toward him, microphones extended like weapons. But Marcus didn't flinch. He stood tall, his shoulders back, his voice clear and strong as he began to speak. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I am an attorney, a husband, a father, and a citizen of this city. Last night, I was stopped without cause, arrested without justification, and treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin. Today, I stand before you not just as a victim, but as someone who is going to fight to make sure this never happens to anyone else." The questions came in a barrage, but Marcus answered them with calm precision, never losing his composure. He spoke about constitutional rights, about racial profiling, about the need for accountability and reform. He spoke about the recording that captured everything, about the officer's laughter, about the system that had failed him and countless others. As he talked, Marcus saw the crowd growing. People had stopped on the courthouse steps to listen. Some were holding up phones, recording his words. Others were nodding in agreement, their faces showing recognition of shared experiences. He saw tears on some faces, anger on others, but mostly he saw hope, hope that maybe, finally, someone with resources and a platform was willing to take on the fight. When the impromptu press conference finally ended, Marcus felt exhausted but strangely energized. Tom put a hand on his shoulder. "You did good, my friend. Really good." Sarah squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Maya looked up at him with eyes full of admiration and something else, a new understanding of who her father was and what he stood for. As they walked